So, trees, climate change, where does that all fit? How does that all fit into the world? And what do we face at the end of 2025 and the start of 2026 of the next few years in terms of the interrelationship between green space, between climate change and with trees? And I'm just going to touch on a bit of that to give you a bit of thought of some of the things that are going on around the country. But I ought to explain who we are first. Tree Council is a charity. We were set up to parallel the Forestry Commission. So the Forestry Commission existed as the woods entity. We were set up to parallel that for all the trees outside woods. I hate that phrase because it refers back to what we're not. We'll come back to that later. It's like saying black is not white. You know, they're the trees in the landscape. All of those are ours. Within Tree Council, within yourselves, that's the bit of the market that we're interested. That's the bit of the system that we operate, and we do that through things like tree wardens and volunteers. And one of the Park Forum's trustees is our Tree Council's Sam, who's over here, who coordinates the tree warden network for across the country. We do that through education. We do that through science, and we do that through working with lots of different organisations across the country. We're the spiders in the middle of the web that deal with tree policy across the 4 nations, outside of the woods. All the trees that you look after fall within our remit, except those which are in the woods. So we do that. Trees outside woods. These are the ones just by me at home in the local park on the beach in Portsmouth. Not necessarily the greatest trees, not necessarily the most awe-inspiring trees, but they are the trees that most people see. They're the trees that people react to, the trees that people engage with when they go for a walk, when they go to school, when they're taking the kids out for a look. Those are the trees that matter to us, to me. And the really intriguing part is the percentage of the landscape that this makes up without us realising it. So this is a description of the area of trees that are in Britain. Now the big blue wedge is conifers. So that's the biggest single tree type in the country, commercial conifers. The grey wedge, that's all the ancient broadleaf woods. But that orange wedge is all the hedgerows and linear features and trees that are in scattered lines across the country. Turns out that they are the single biggest and largest native tree habitat in the country, bigger than all the woods put together. They're just dispersed. They're just a thread that runs through the country. Then we have smaller woodlands, wood pastures, groups of trees, lone trees. And I'm trying to change the narrative at the moment because what we talk about is that England has 10% woodland. But actually what we have is the trees in the remaining 90% of the landscape, which matter to me more. And those trees in the 90% are the ones that we should be focusing on because they're the ones that people see. But the research, the money, the funding has gone around the woods. So we have to rebalance the equation because that provides you with all the funding and the opportunities to do the stuff you want to do in your parks. And that conversation is active at the moment. This was a picture I actually took in Bradgate Park last time we had one of these forums. And when we did the last one of these, there wasn't a statistic for the value of those trees. But it now turns out, since the last time I stood in front of you, that we can actually begin to quantify it. And there are 3.2% of Britain is covered by all of the trees that I care about, the non-woodland stuff. 10% of England, remember, is woods. Of that, half and half conifer broadleaf. So we have almost as much as the broadleaf woodland across the country. And that matters. The thing is that you've got dispersed quantities. You've got maybe 10 or 50 or 20 in your parks. And you don't necessarily think of them as part of the wider treescape, but we have to start joining up. And that's why opportunities like this, where you're together thinking about all of these issues. And for me, many of your greatest heritage assets, to take the thing that James has just announced, will be the trees in your parks. So I hope that as part of this project that's going on, there will be thought about the better management of those trees in your parks as part of those heritage assets. Again, since I stood in front of you last time, the world has changed a bit, because now we're starting to find the words to express the narratives. The budget is changing. So you can see these are the new woodland, new plantings that existed, the amount of money that was spent, and the amount of hectareage that was spent in planting trees. And up to 2020, there wasn't any part of the budget line that was for trees outside woods. There's no green bit. This is the latest Forestry Commission statistics. Look what's happened over the last 5 years. That pale green part of the wedge is increasing because there is more budget being allocated to the sorts of things that you all do and the places that you have than ever before. And last time, for 2024-5, 20% of the budget was now being spent, nationally, was now being spent on places like yours, on green spaces, on parks, not the woods. For me, that's huge. That's quantum. That is a major change that is quietly happening. And that's led us to have quite a lot of new funding. So, for example, I've got trees that we give away from National Highways. I've got trees that we give away from Network Rail. This year I had £1 million which we gave away to local authorities for trees outside wood projects. And I hope some of your authorities will have applied because the money went to local authorities. I'm hoping next year we might get 2 or 3 million. We might get more and more over the next few years because the line of travel is turning towards trees outside woods. And why does this matter in climate change terms? It's because it's the places that people see. It's the places that people are that are now getting the trees being put in. And as Becky's going to talk about later, engaging people with trees and the environment to help with that climate anxiety is really, really important. And they're going to do that where they live and work. And if we can have more budget being spent in this space, then that's good for everybody, both from an environmental, an ecological and a psychological perspective, because it means that things change. And change is good if it's positive and it's the right direction. We also had a whole lot of research since I last stood with you called the Shared Outcomes Fund. This was a £5 million bit of research from DEFRA that looked at how we planted the trees outside woods in different ways. Because the assumption was it was very expensive, because the assumption was the only thing that we could do was plant street trees. And they were really expensive and that wasn't good. But it's not true. As you all know, you've got land, you've got parks, you've got spaces where you can plant trees in different ways at different prices. That wasn't realised, that wasn't valued. If you haven't seen the research, do have a look at there's a whole load of resources on our Trees Outside Woods website, on Tree Council stuff. Huge amounts of things, some of which may not be helpful to you per se, but there's lots of information, for example, about how to create new trees on farms, which was one. And then we did a whole series of stuff on things like Miyawaki plantings. Now, Miyawaki plantings have surprised me because they have really created controversy. In a world that really shouldn't have it, it's become a really battle situation in some places. Oh, I don't like that, it's a waste of money, waste of time. Other people love it. There's lots to unpick in that space. Have a look at our website for all the information. But fundamentally, what it is, it's about changing the way that we plant. And if you plant differently, it turns out that you can have infinitely better growth rates. So when we planted controls next to Miyawakis, the controls after 3 years were just under 1 metre tall. But the stuff that were planted in a different way was nearly 4 metres tall. Exactly the same day planting, exactly the same everything, except different ground treatment. And that matters. That matters because if you can get impact, and you can get good impact, you can get people to engage with the thing faster than you'd imagine. Somebody said to me, it might have been Becky earlier, planting trees, no, it was last night. You plant them, you don't expect you're going to see anything. But actually in 5 or 6 years, if they're planted well, suddenly you can have 4 and 5 metres of growth. And that's really important if you get it right and if we do it properly. Most of the research, however, has been done in forestry creation, not in terms of creation of stuff outside the woods. So rebalancing the equation, having the discussion, asking the question, saying, well, how do we do this in your world? And we do it better. That's the sort of thing that we now need to be pushing at and pushing on with. And there's one. There literally is, planted the same day, left-hand side in Norfolk, left-hand side planted conventionally, normal local authority rules, right-hand side planted with some extra ground preparation. Just over 1 metre, just over 4 metres. Now, I don't care what anybody tells you, that is stunning to behold. To suddenly see something that has done 4 times the growth than you would have expected. It's unbelievable. And in terms of the community, makes a really, really powerful message if suddenly you can change spaces quite quickly. But to do that, you've got to get it right. We have to do better treatment. We have to do better management of our spaces so that any money that you spend in this space is achieving its maximum effect. This was a little experiment that we did in a place in North London where we planted a hedge. We planted it and we followed it through over 5 years. And you can see day one, literally nothing, and so on up to here where we've got a height of nearly 4 metres. We did some controlled experiments. One lot was planted by volunteers under my supervision, so therefore they were planted well. One lot was planted by contractors who was under no supervision and deliberately, it's an experiment. One lot was planted by seed and one lot was planted by nature. What do you think happened? Which grew fastest?
Yours.
Yes, obviously mine. Rank them. Which do you think came first? Height after 4 years. Volunteer-led one first?
Yeah.
Yes? Come on, talk to me, somebody. Next, nature, contractors or seed? Nature. Next, contractors or seed? Seed. Now that tells you something, that you've just ranked contractors at the bottom of the list. It's not quite what happened. It's not quite what happened because the contractors worked, but the volunteers had 4 metres of growth, 94% survival rate. Contractors, 60% survival rate, 2 metres of height. Seed, 100% take of the right species, 100% failure of other species. 2 years behind because it was grown from seed, whereas the other stuff was coming from a nursery. So height-wise, 2 years behind. 5 years in, caught up and overtaken. Nature did nothing because there wasn't a seed source. And without a seed source, it doesn't matter what happens, you can't make it happen. So it was exactly the same on day one as it was on day 5 years in, because there wasn't a seed source. What did it teach me? It taught me that if you're going to plant trees, you've got to plant them with love. Because if you plant them with love, they are going to do better. If you're planting trees and individual trees in your park, don't just slam them in, excuse the French, do it properly. Because if you're going to do it, you might as well do it well. Because if you do it well, it'll look better. It'll give you more budget because they will grow faster. And with a changing climate, these issues are going to become more and more prevalent. What's your species choice for the next 50 years? What should you be planting? This was on the Isle of Wight, discovered it quite recently. It's a cork oak forest, planted by Queen Victoria. She was quite instrumental in thinking about the future. How does that impact on your thought processes? What do you plant? All sorts of interesting lists being published this week to do that. Just remember that there is no one-size list that fits all. It is very subjective, and what you have to do is to get the damn thing to survive the first few years, because if it doesn't survive the first few years, then it doesn't matter what it's like for 50 years. So you've got to plant for the here and now and for something for the future. And the reason that the trees are The words are there in case anybody wants the presentation afterwards. The reason that this matters is that the statistics are showing that the climate's changing 10 times faster than we are used to. What that means is that there are increasing uncertainties in our treescape. There are increasing risks and pests and diseases. And all of that matters because we need to be careful about what we plant. We need to be careful about where we're buying it from. You don't want to go and buy stuff from the continent and bring in the next pest and disease. So your local authorities should have biosecurity policies. You should do it. Not talk about doing it, not have a policy that sits on a shelf. You should be thinking about where does the stuff I'm planting come from so that you are not planting the next ash dieback, which ironically started in Leicester and other places because that didn't start there, but it was found there. I don't want that to be your next West Midland claim to fame is that you're all planting trees and you introduce the next pest or disease that wipes out the oaks, for example. So seriously contemplate your biosecurity policies to make them work. All of the evidence suggests from all across Europe that the places where new pests and diseases become established are big urban areas, which have movement of stuff in. And all of the data tells us that those pests and diseases, wherever they are, the majority of them, are in our urban environments, in parks. Because by creating a new streetscape, you're introducing lots of new food sources for all those foreign things, diseases that want to come and live in them. So diversity is good, but risk is increased by creating it. So in a changing climate, how are you going to manage that? Needs a bit of thought, needs a bit of thinking through. We've tried to get volunteers to go out and look at some of this stuff. And so we have targets for going to look and checking for pests and diseases. I'm almost out of time, so I've got to keep going. But we're also going to plant 1 billion trees. The target nationally is to plant 1 billion trees over the next 30 years. It's not expressed like that. It's expressed as 30,000 hectares a year over 30 years. It's 1 billion trees. So how are we going to plant them? What are your techniques that you're using to plant them with? Are you using mulch? Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Are you spreading pests and diseases around with all that chopped up mulch that you're using to get the next batch of trees to go? Don't know, nor does anybody else. We need to be thinking about it. We also then started to think it's not just about planting them, it's about checking on establishment. Establishment is what really matters, getting them to live. So we've been running a series of trials, experimenting with getting people to record your survival rates. That's the Pandora's box of questions, the one nobody wants to open. What happens to them once we've planted them? So we've been running some tests. Turns out we can get some really interesting stats out of these things, like the species that are thriving best. Come on, move on. We can start to unpack some of the characteristics of what is doing well in our landscape, what is thriving, what isn't thriving. We can start to look at the causal factors of death just by having people doing some stats on what you've got. Next year we will be doing an even bigger version. It would be my huge ask of all of you next year to go out and have a look at your survival rates and feed us the data. It's all anonymous, so you'll never get to a situation where, oh, Derby's got and oh, Leicester's got, and oh, because that's not the point. The point is to understand what's driving the factors of mortality. And there's a whole load of complicated science that have gone behind all this stuff of what we're asking people to record. But fundamentally, it's about trying to break the system down from a binary, it's alive or dead, into understanding a bit more about the nuances. So we have 3 categories of trees that live, and 1 category of tree that's dead. The reason for that is that you can start rating your trees. So, bit of audience participation for my last couple of minutes. You have 1 is excellent, 2 is average, 3 is poor, 4 is / dead. 1, 2, 3 or 4, shout out. 3. See how simple it is? And once you get that, you start to get into a ability to articulate what's happening in your space. Come on. What's that? 1, 2, 3 or 4? 1, exactly. Because it's in good nick for what it is, for where it is. Start to be able to get some more nuanced data on, it's not just alive or dead, it's a bit more. 1, 2, 3 or 4? 4. You see how simple the whole process is? By doing something simple, giving it to people, but there's a lot more underlies it that then tells us a lot more data, you can get to a place where you start to be able to get some stats. So that as we practice what we preach, this year we've just gone out and had a look at what we've done, all sorts of data that underlies it. And there's my numbers for this summer. Bear in mind this is for this summer. So we've got roughly a quarter of them are in excellent category. Just a bit more is in the good category. About a quarter is in the poor category. And about a quarter is in the dead category. All of those dead ones, drought-ridden sites, almost nothing happened there because it dried out. Teaches us something. Need to spread the planting load. Don't do it all in 1 year. Do it over a few years in drought-ridden sites. But it also starts to highlight the places where you can focus the return visits. Because the return visits should be on the sites where there are 3s. Because there's where you can do something. So we're learning. And that means we have to review all of our techniques like tree guards. This summer, more trees cooked than in tree guards than anything else. The original research in the 80s said tree guards are brilliant, except they run the chance of cooking the trees in hot summers. Then he wrote, fortunately, in 1980, we don't have that many hot summers. So it's not a problem. 50 years on, we do. We need to think about all of those techniques. Blatant plug, I've just written a book on tree identification. I've got a few for sale. But the reason this matters is that we've got to engage people with the topic. And so it's a whole different style of tree ID book with lots of natural history as well. And to conclude, what all of this should tell you is that to get trees to thrive in this changing climate, we need all of you to care about the trees in your places. We need all of you to do something about affecting the management of the trees in your spaces. We need all of you to start thinking about how you plant, what happens to the stuff that you've got there in slightly different ways, because the climate is changing and the spaces that you manage represent probably the majority of trees that people across the West Midlands will see on a day-to-day basis. Therefore, you really, really matter. And therefore, the way you manage those trees really, really matters, because they are the gateway to the whole of the environmental story. Most people start with, oh, it's a tree. And then they get into, oh, there's a bug on it. Oh, that's the gateway to the whole system. Because those everyday trees matter. It's the ones that people see when they're running, they're walking, they're out with their park. So remember in future that you haven't got just a few trees. You are the managers of the trees in the majority of the landscape. The trees that the majority of people in this part of the world will see. And therefore what you do for our trees is vital to the future of the climate, the landscape, and the ecology of this part of the world. Thank you all for listening.